Welcome, everyone, to the Sacred Wealth Awakening, where we explore the intersection of money, soul, and purpose. Today's guest, Dr. Christine Hall, bridges science and spirituality to help people heal at the deepest level and align with higher frequencies of well-being and abundance. She is a leading expert in integrative mental health with over 30 years of experience. She integrates modern science and ancient wisdom in her practice, training zero-point meridian practitioners and guiding quantum meditation groups. Author of Transformative Healing Tools, Christine's mission is to raise frequencies and foster holistic wellness. Christine, welcome to Sacred Wealth Awakening.
Thank you. It's so good to be here and join you in this beautiful
Yes.
cause.
Well, it's nice to have you here. We've had such a nice diversity of speakers, so we're really excited to have you join the mix. What I've been doing, Christine, basically is first just asking, like, what brought you here? Like, what was your story? And how did you get to doing the work that you do now that you have such a passion for?
That's a great question. So my own journey has it's been through multiple levels frequency wise. Okay. And I think you have some other speakers talking about Dr. Hawkins' model
Mhm.
of calibrating the emotional map, of consciousness. And so more or less, that's my story is that I've been on a journey of raising my frequency for the past 30 some years, 36 years, since I personally had a spiritual awakening that took me out of a very dark place in my life that was related to substance use and really just kind of a soulless, I would call it, existence. And my initial awakening was very spiritual in nature, and so I leaned on my spirituality and I grew very much in frequency leaps and bounds in my spiritual path. And there was a point in time, and I got my master's degree. I was working as a school psychologist, and I was enjoying my career, and realized that, I'd made so many gains really in my life, but I was divorced at the time, and I was still searching for love. Um, I was not searching for money. I will clarify that. And I had a little conversation with God. We've heard of conversations with God. We have our own, right?
Yes.
And I, was positioned to answer like, okay, would you like to, in this, the real things coming, would you like it to be for love or for money? And it was so obvious. Well, definitely I would marry for love, right? Or find, love before I'd find, settle into money. Well, God's response to that was, but you could do so much for the world with money. And I had never looked at marrying for love as being a selfish thing. And what
Yeah.
I realized, and you think about it, like back in the ages of,
Yeah.
monarchies and such, the marriage was for financial purposes quite often, or for political purposes or power. And, so love was a luxury. And it was kind of like I was positioned to think in terms of like what would be in the greatest good. And so I released my goal of marrying for love, and I had a 16-year journey with a man who brought a lot of wealth and abundance to my life and taught me more than, oh, I'm goodness, one of the greatest teachers of my life. And I went on record saying everyone should have a narcissist in their life as such a teacher. Because that was how I framed wealth, as well as for those narcissists out there who really just care about, you know, these gains and, what does their bank account show, and they're not skillful in relationships or, you know,
Yeah.
doing things out of love.
Mhm.
And so that the last few years of my life, I have really learned a lot about having both. So
Mhm.
anyway, it's been an adventure.
Yeah. I appreciate kind of you bringing that up because I think it isn't one or the other. It is you can marry the
Yeah.
two. right? You can have both. It's not, you have to have only one or the other. So it's nice that you found a way. And I also like the way you're framing it that, because these experiences do happen to all of us in our life, whatever they happen to look like, they do come, I think, as teachers, although we don't like to see them as that sometimes, or we don't see them at that until later. And we look back and say, oh, I see what I learned from that, or what that brought into my life. So thank you for sharing all of that.
Yeah. So in the raising of my frequency, I found that, well, so I have 5 areas. So I actually do a frequency assessment with people and use the scale that Dr. Hawkins developed, where 200 is kind of the average. If you look at, our globally where people are at, and 600 is enlightenment. And so what's interesting though is I think I'm the only one I know of who's broken it down.
I'm sorry to interrupt you, but I want first, because you have some really good information to share. Can you first give the audience your explanation of what frequency is?
Yes, I could do that.
Talk about raising or lowering frequency. What does that mean?
It is a calibration. And so that's what Dr. Hawkins explains it as. One of the most common ways to kind of get a feel for frequency is music. And so Dr. Hawkins rated music in different calibrations. And so I kind of refer to it as like, you've got at a 100 frequency in music, you've got like death metal and, anarchist, kind of whatever you want to call it, rap or whatever. And so it could do some damage, right? And so 100 in worldview is poverty, homelessness, mental illness, addictions, very dark places to be. At a 200 frequency, you can kind of imagine the music kind of climbing along with this, but a 200 is where there's a dependency model. So you're kind of clinging to like a life raft, but you're not drowning. And financially, to move it that direction, it is like you've got state assistance, but there's not really anything beyond that. You don't really have a future beyond that. You're just kind of like depending on, your disability is what gets you by, kind of thing. So at a 300 level, and this is kind of where I think the calibration of country music fits, and other just kind of like general life, so that's in financial terms, you've got your paycheck, you've got your retirement, you've got things kind of lined up, you're socially responsible, and you're also dealing with, kind of like in the country song, loss, because you've got catalysts for change, which may or may not take you out of the 300. Sometimes people, that's what causes them to relapse, say, if they've quit drinking, but then life serves up a divorce or a job loss or some other, a health issue. And it can be a catalyst for the next level, or it can also be the thing that takes them backwards.
Back down, yeah.
So, and then we go to the 400, and that's where it gets out of the box and the awakening journey starts at the 400. So you get out of this socially normed way of life into the more radical, if you want to call it that, or emotionally volatile way of living, where it's not easy at a 400, but people would call it worth it because the joy and the rewards are bigger and the challenges are bigger and the test is bigger. And so it's also the creativity. And when you get really quality things like music that transcends time, that people are still listening to 30 years later because it's powerful and passionate, and it tells of depth of soul. I would even put in there like Queen's Bohemian Rhapsody, the quality of that. So it doesn't necessarily mean that it's, all positive, but it was way outside the box. If you watch the movie,
Yeah, we did.
They got a lot of pushback on that. And I think living at that level, you get a lot of pushback. You have some haters. You have some people could be jealous because you've escaped the box. Like you've left that paycheck job because you believe in this other potential, like coaching, or going and doing what you're doing, in opening up something that hasn't been done before. So
Wow.
there's a foundation so far of frequency
Yeah.
levels.
So, well, let's look at so you bring together modern science and ancient wisdom in your work. So
Mm.
how do these two worlds kind of come together to help people heal, especially the relationship like around money, stress, well-being?
Perfect question. Segue to a 400 frequency tool. So people have probably heard of EFT, Emotional Freedom Technique, came out in the early 2000s, and it was around the time that EMDR was also trying to get a foothold and make its way into the clinical world. So both are kind of tools for healing trauma. And what's interesting is as you start to work with more than just the mind, if you work with the vital body, for example, or the subconscious, you're working at a 400 frequency typically. You're starting to tap into something that goes outside of just what science has found or what decades of repetition, say with cognitive behavioral therapy, have found. And so I took my master's and I did school psychology for a while. And what was interesting is I recognized the need for tools that went outside the box. Even in working with children, I had a student at the time, that was about 2003. And I had started taking Gary Craig's EFT courses. And I was sitting with this student who had been, she was on an IEP for emotional behavioral issues, which was kind of new at the time. So it was beyond learning disabilities. It was like they recognized some students had mental illness or emotional issues, limbic issues that they couldn't gain their regular educational experience like other students. And so my job was to work with her and try to keep her in school. And that was our goal, was like keep her in class. Well, she would get hijacked and start to melt down and would typically call home and lose a day of school, a half day of school at minimum. And so I sat with her. Okay. My role was to intervene, and I took her in my office when she was melting down, and I just learned this tool, and I sat with her and we started tapping. So we started tapping, and 10 to 15 minutes of that, and she was back to like mastering her emotions. And she'd released the, reactivity, her brain had shifted. She could go back to class. And I remember the principal and the teachers and the school counselor were all just like, how did you do that? That has never happened before. So I was feeling really good about myself. And I'm like, we've got to bring this to other students. So over the next 2 to 3 years, I worked with students, I tested it out some more, and then I went to the district and said, I'd like to create groups and not have this be a thing. And it was officially shut down because it was experimental. It wasn't backed up by enough research. There was at the time a couple of research articles that had gone. Patricia Carrington was a PhD psychologist who'd published, the use of it in handling phobias and different things. And it just wasn't enough. And so I realized at that point, if I really wanted to use what worked, I had to get out of the box. And so I began to move towards having a private practice. And in my private practice, I claimed my role as an integrative mental health practitioner. And so integrative mental health is kind of like integrative medicine in that you're bringing together something like the vital body and the meridian pathways and meridian-based tapping along with CBT, which is we're breaking down the obstacles to behavior change, like we're, having this happen twice a week. And we set up a goal that says, okay, it's going to only happen twice a month. And then we get down to where we go 2 months without an incident,
Yeah.
So a lot of the things I was doing as a school psychologist were goals and measurable and that type of thing. And I realized we could still measure and still create the structure around treatment plans, for example, and use these kinds of tools and show the impact. And so that was really all, it's like when you're billing insurance, you don't have to tell insurance what you're using. Really, what's kind of sad is it's even less, measurable than as a school psychologist.
Yeah.
I had to document like we were making progress every for a few months or, yearly, annually when the IEP would renew. In private practice, I didn't have to document anything except how many minutes I was seeing the client, which is really sad. There was a different billing code for 53 minutes. If I held on to the client for 53 minutes, I could bill higher, versus 52 minutes, which was a different billing code. And that was all I was held to. And I started to realize the unfortunate situation of our healthcare model and mental health care model in that we're not really even accountable to things working. And, I became very much all about let's see what really works. And I've created several instruments and along with the development of a more protocol-driven EFT model. So actually mine incorporates some quantum components and it is called 0 Point Meridian. And it's based after kind of the protocol model of EMDR, which is eye movement desensitization reprocessing, which is now well known because the technique actually holds itself up. And what's interesting is that clinicians are typically sought after just because they have a name, they've, got certain practice, people know who they are in the community, say, or they have room, or they take your insurance. And it's really not about how effective are they. But EMDR has built itself a name because it's a technique that it's kind of like a franchise. It's like you go to McDonald's and you're going to get the same thing in different, locations. So it's less of a home cooked meal and more of a standardized process. So anyway, ZPM is more of a standardized process of EFT. And I've shown it to be effective. I've trained now about 50 practitioners and we've actually held it up against EMDR and it's showing to be twice as effective in a single session, which I love.
What does it mean, Christine, to return to 0 point? Like what?
The 0 point is, so what we're doing is we're actually working with the meridians in their, we're calming the meridian and stimulating the meridian. But in the calming of the meridian, and we're using breath work with it, we're actually reaching a 0. So we're neutralizing all the energy before we restore, kind of like turning off the computer.
Right,
and then starting it up, and it's like a clean startup. So yeah.
So you're looking at it. So the 0 then is like when somebody asks you, like on a scale of 0 to 10, where are you? How strong is your emotion? That's the point. You're getting down.
The idea is to get to 0, where you don't even have a reference point to the emotion because you are completely in stillness and silence. Is the idea?
Gotcha. Yeah. So how do you?
Okay.
Go ahead.
Oh, I would still call it like a 400 frequency technique. It's kind of moving towards the 500, which we can get to the 500, but it's still more useful when emotion comes up. And so it's still kind of used for those who are in the 400 range and going through that roller coaster of kind of the ups and downs of things. And whether that's fear-based or, guilt is a big one. Like when I work with a lot of my clients, parenting guilt, for example, is such a trigger. And it's hard to neutralize that because you feel guilty about that. Isn't that, it's such a catch-22. It's like, well, I should, I've caused this or if onlys. and all that. And so it's almost like freeing yourself to go to that zero is the biggest part of those equation, really, is letting it all go. But as people learn to do that, then you start moving into the 500, which is kind of the next point of transformation.
Right. And so I guess as you're going up that scale, if you can relate this to like when you talk about the 0 point and releasing emotional charge around like money and scarcity. And so what do you like, what do you see with your clients and how do you help move them through whatever it is or those low
So
points?
like as I connect parenting guilt. So one of the groups that I've worked with quite a bit are, we're in our 50s or so and we're good. We've gone through this life journey and financially we might be fairly set, but then we have that generation of children in their 20s and 30s who may or may not have put it together. And, as I've worked with a lot of people, and some are in the recovering from addiction world, that type of thing. And, and myself, I look at, what I knew raising my children at a 200 frequency when that was where I was at. I mean, think about that doesn't set, up that next generation very well. And, and so letting go of that and not feeling financially responsible, for example, for handouts. And that's been one of my biggest learning experiences over the last year or two, I would say, is it's a release of kind of the codependent model of, whether it's your own flesh and blood or your community, like your tribe, feeling, less responsible or guilty about being, survivor guilt to some extent. Like some of us, we're kind of right on that horizon of financial independence or comfort. And are we going to allow ourselves to step into that or get caught with all the people who are not there and the sense of obligation to, give it away, for example? And I think a lot of people deal with some of that. And my own motivation to become wealthy was out of taking care of others. It was, how many people could I help with financial resources? And so knowing what that looks like is very different than, handouts maybe, or overgiving. So even in a business practice, like you may have a lot more impact, quantity wise, but need to narrow that down to get the quality of clients, even though it means impacting fewer people. And that, sometimes you got to clear the guilt with that or the sense of responsibility with that.
Right. And around that is some of it just, valuing yourself, feeling you're worthy enough to bring it in.
Yes, definitely letting go of old programs and, clearing out your own ego stuff. So there's a segue to the 500. So what I found is that the ego will play the role of mercenary almost in your mind and will trap you in things that are really not your highest good or the highest good really of anybody else. But the ego is so, devious in the way that it traps the mind and can throw you off your course even, or your potential with low frequency emotions, guilt and fear and obligation and storylines. Just even getting caught in a story can detour you from moving forward. So the solution I found though, at that 500 frequency is where you become more masterful over the ego mind and can incorporate it maybe where it does serve a purpose, but then free yourself to connect more to spirit and really like abundance at that point.
Huh.
And there's a freedom to it and a consistency. So it is kind of the way off the roller coaster.
Interesting. So, Christine, for those that are listening today who may be feeling stuck or energetically drained, what's a simple practice that they can do to raise their frequency and open to greater abundance?
So I've developed something recently and I'm really excited to debut it even here and in a couple other things I'm doing this month. But I have developed kind of like an abundance protocol. And so in that, they have a free link that we'll share at the end. And it's a way for people to step into like just having a workbook kind of thing, like a protocol with this alignment statement. And we could do it real quick. Would you like to just jump in and do it? Okay.
Sure.
So I think let's use guilt as basically a saboteur. And what you're doing, and people are familiar with the karate chop point. A lot of times if they've studied EFT, I'm going to share the different version of my alignment statement. So I refer to it as an alignment statement rather than a setup statement. Okay. But we'll just use this, even though I'm sabotaged by guilt.
Even though I'm sabotaged by guilt.
And you can be more specific if you want to, but this will work. And it reduces my abundance.
And it reduces my abundance.
I love and accept myself completely.
I love and accept myself completely.
With infinite love and gratitude.
With infinite love and gratitude.
I release and forgive.
I release and forgive.
And you can just hold that point, take a deep breath in. And then really exhale. And exhale a little bit more. And a little bit more. Just like that 3-layer exhale. Where there's just nothing left the vacuum is empty. And you just kind of sit in that empty vacuum. And when you're ready to breathe back in, the interesting thing about that is a little bit of a nervous system reset. And I love that, one of the first emails I sent out was, is it your mindset or is it your nervous system? Basically, right? So
Exactly.
in that total exhale, you're resetting your nervous system to get into the parasympathetic. And that's your brakes, your brake pedal. And so in that, it's like you stop in that mental running and you sit in this stillness. And then I usually bring in quantum wholeness meditation at that point, which is something I teach as well. But what I want to introduce, and this is kind of fun, is a fun little quantum reset. So part of our title is the quantum reset. And I've actually gotten a private label on these formulas. I didn't develop all of them. I have one that I claim. But this is actually information that interacts with your information field to reset programming. And it's just, sometimes it helps to just have a tool, right?
Yeah.
Along with some affirmations. So we're going to jump right into what's called the face it lift formula, which is kind of the way it describes it is, just like think of a facelift, right? But you're getting a facelift where you face it, where you don't run from whatever it is that you've been running from,
Love it.
And a lot of times that's a money thing, right? I don't want to look at it. So you face it with a lift. And so some of these affirmations, we're just going to tap. So what we do is and this is kind of one of my integrative tools with our tapping technique, is we're putting 4 fingers here because we're going to cover the left and right hemisphere of the brain. And it does something from Body Talk that's called cortices. And it just brings an integration. All right. So here's a few. I face my life with optimism and vitality.
I face my life with optimism and vitality.
I choose to take personal responsibility.
Choose to take personal responsibility.
I have faith and hope in the future.
I have faith and hope in the future.
I'm created for great things.
I'm created for great things.
I feel lifted and supported
I
to
feel
make
lifted
positive changes.
and supported and make positive changes.
So that's just kind of a quick little nutshell of the technique. It's, you know, there's much more to it than that. We didn't do any of the tapping points really, but it's those are the kind of the bookends. And just even doing that can, and it's quick, 5 minutes.
Mm-hmm.
And
Is
you've
that part
released
of what you
something.
are? Is that part of what you are giving?
Yes.
Right.
So yeah, that's all in our little free giveaway that you'll find. So yeah, an
Cool.
abundance protocol. And using the affirmations, you don't need the formulas, but they are available. And what I love about them is you only take them for 2 weeks. They're not something that you depend on. It's not a 200 frequency supplement where you lean on it and you're still ordering it 5 years later.
Yeah.
Although I have taken these for 10 years, it's very off and on and as needed. And it's allowed me to make these quantum shifts in multiple life areas.
Wow. That's very cool. Very cool. Is there anything else that you would like to maybe leave us with at the end? I mean, you've told us about your free gift already, so we're
Yes.
all excited about that, and we'll click on the link below for.
This is a book that I'm actually bringing out on Audible this month. And so it's called Being at Zero. So when you ask about the zero,
Yeah.
that's it's I don't know of any other memoir anthologies, but it's the memoir of my leaving because I mentioned the 16 years I spent, in my major life curriculum.
Yes.
And it talks about how I ended up with both the love and the money and tells the story.
Yes.
That's the memoir part. And then there's some great speakers who I've had on my online events like you're doing, and they share there's some really good quality information and support,
Wow.
inspirational um, chapters that weave in through the memoir.
Yeah. That's always nice to read those. They're always uplifting. It's always nice to hear what other people go through and how they interpret,
Yeah,
how they do it, or how they move through it. So, because I mean, this is life. We're all moving through something, right?
exactly.
So this has been wonderful, Christine. So much great information and insights. I really appreciate it. I'm sure that everyone's going to go home with a nugget from here or there in the conversation that touches them specifically. So this has been great. Thank you so much for joining me. I really do appreciate
Thank you. I admire you. I know what it takes to bring this into the world, and what I can guarantee is that you are going to benefit from this personally. It is almost, that was the thing. I know I love it when people everywhere, many people can benefit, but the the effort that you put in definitely comes back.
it.
It's a reciprocal thing. And so my prayers to you to receive that.
Thank you. Thank you. I am. I learned something from every speaker I have interviewed. So it's been definitely a learning process and absorbing a lot of wonderful insights and information. So really do feel blessed with it all.
Yes. And I'm sure many, many others will also come away with something of value. And thank you for bringing some extra light and frequency lifts to the world.
You are welcome. That's what this is all about. And hopefully that is what we are doing. As like I know if that's what we're doing. So
Mhm.
again, thank you very much, Christine. And we'll
Thank
see
you.
everyone on the next interview. Take care.